I never thought I'd be planning my own funeral at 35. Not like this, anyway. But here I was, frozen in my hallway, listening to my husband and mother-in-law casually discuss my death over coffee. My name is Nicole, and until 20 minutes ago, I thought I was living a normal, if somewhat strained, life. I'd left Lauren's house early, cutting our weekly girls' night short because of a migraine. Now, I wished I'd stayed. It has to look natural. Jonathan's voice drifted from the kitchen. We can't risk any suspicions. The medication I suggested will do exactly that, Helen replied, her tone as casual as if discussing dinner plans. Mixed into her evening tea, she'll just drift off. No pain, no mess. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp. The designer handbag I'd been about to drop slipped silently to the carpet. "And you're sure it can't be traced?" Jonathan asked. "Darling, I was a nurse for 30 years. Trust your mother on this." My stomach churned. The same woman who'd criticized my cooking at Sunday dinners for the past decade was now plotting my murder over chocolate biscuits. I could smell them, the ones she always brought over, claiming mine were too dry. "What about the insurance company?" Jonathan's chair scraped against the tile. "They'll investigate. That's why we wait until after the policy's 2-year contestability period ends. 3 more months, and it'll be perfect timing." I'd signed that policy at Jonathan's insistence. "It's just responsible planning, sweetheart," he'd said, kissing my forehead. Now I understood why he'd pushed for such a high coverage amount. "The funeral will have to be tasteful," Helen continued. "Nothing too elaborate. That would seem suspicious. But we can't appear cheap either. I'm thinking closed casket, of course." "Of course," Jonathan agreed, and I heard the smile in his voice. The same voice that had whispered, "I love you," just that morning. My legs trembled. I needed to move, to run, to scream. But training as a kindergarten teacher had taught me one valuable lesson. Never let them see you panic. "Have you noticed how distracted she's been lately?" Helen asked. "Almost like she's depressed. That will help our narrative." They weren't wrong about the distraction. I'd been pulling away, spending more time with friends, working later at school. I'd felt Jonathan and Helen's grip tightening, their control becoming more suffocating. I just hadn't realized how literal that suffocation would be. "Lauren might be a problem," Jonathan mused. "They're too close." "Lauren?" Helen scoffed. "That scatterbrained friend of hers? She'll be too busy planning her next vacation to notice anything amiss. Besides, Nicole's been distant with everyone lately." My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Lauren checking if my headache was better. I didn't dare move to check it. "Speaking of distance," Jonathan said, "what about her sister?" "Claire?" Helen laughed. "They haven't spoken in, 3 years? After that spectacular fight at Christmas? Claire won't be an issue." The mention of my sister sent a jolt through me. Claire, with her law degree and sharp mind, who'd warned me about Jonathan from the start. "He's isolating you, Nick," she'd said. "Can't you see it? I'd chosen Jonathan over her that Christmas, ending our relationship in a shower of angry words and slammed doors. Now I realized she'd seen what I'd been blind to all along." "Still," Jonathan insisted, "we should be careful. Claire's clever." "Clever doesn't matter when there's no connection," Helen replied. "Now, about the service. I know the perfect funeral home." I'd heard enough. With trembling hands, I picked up my bag and backed silently toward the front door. I needed to think, to plan, to... The floor creaked beneath my foot. "Did you hear something?" Helen asked. "Probably just the house settling," Jonathan replied. "More tea, Mother?" I slipped out the door like a ghost, closing it with barely a click. My car was parked around the corner. Thank God for street cleaning day forcing me to move it. As I drove away, my mind raced faster than my car. They were planning to kill me. My husband and his mother had sat at our kitchen table, drinking tea from my favorite blue cups, and plotted my death like it was a dinner party. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, hands shaking as I cut the engine. My phone buzzed again, another text from Lauren. But Lauren couldn't help me now. I needed someone stronger, someone smarter, someone who'd seen through Jonathan from the start. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I hadn't called in 3 years. My finger hovered over Claire's name as Helen's words echoed in my head. Claire won't be an issue. Oh, Helen, you have no idea how much of an issue Claire is about to become. I pressed dial. The call rang 3 times before Claire's voice, sharp and professional, cut through the line. This is Claire Henderson. Claire? My voice cracked. It's Nicole. The silence that followed felt longer than our 3 years apart. I could picture her in her office, probably still working despite the late hour, her desk meticulously organized, unlike my chaotic classroom. Are you drunk? She finally asked. No, I glanced around the empty diner parking lot. I need your help. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. Like you needed my help 3 years ago? Before you told me to stay out of your perfect life? I deserved that. They're planning to kill me. Another pause. Who's planning to kill you? Jonathan and Helen. I overheard them tonight. They were discussing my funeral, how to make my death look natural. Helen even has medication from her nursing days. My words tumbled out faster than I could control them. Where are you now? Pete's Diner on Madison. Stay there, I'm coming. She hung up before I could respond. 20 minutes later, Claire's black Mercedes pulled into the spot next to mine. She looked exactly as I remembered, perfectly tailored blazer, not a hair out of place even at this hour. But her eyes were softer than I expected. Inside, she said, nodding toward the diner. You look like you need coffee. The fluorescent lights made everything feel surreal as we slid into a booth. A tired waitress brought us coffee without asking, probably used to late-night crisis meetings in vinyl booths. Tell me everything, Claire said, adding 3 sugars to her coffee. Still the same sweet tooth. And don't leave anything out. I recounted what I'd overheard, watching her face remain carefully neutral. When I finished, she leaned back, arms crossed. You do realize how this sounds, right? Like I'm paranoid? Crazy? I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug. I know what I heard, Claire. That's not what I meant. She leaned forward. It sounds like exactly what I warned you about. The isolation, the control, the way they've been slowly suffocating you. Only now they're making it literal. I should have listened to you. Yes, you should have. She took a sip of coffee. But that's not helpful right now. What's your plan? Plan? I laughed weakly. My plan was calling you. And what do you expect me to do? File a police report about a conversation you overheard? They'll deny everything, and you'll look unstable, which is probably part of their setup. Then what do I do? Claire's eyes got that gleam I remembered from childhood, the one that always meant trouble. We make them reveal themselves. How? By giving them exactly what they want, your death. She held up a hand as I started to protest. Not literally, but if they want a funeral so badly, let's give them one they'll never forget. You want me to fake my own death? I want you to take your power back. She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly. But first, you need to answer something honestly. How did you let it get this far? The question hit like a slap. I don't know. Yes, you do. Her eyes met mine. You've been letting them chip away at you for years. Your job, your friends, your family, me. When was the last time you made a decision without considering their approval? I stared into my coffee, watching the ripples. I thought I was being a good wife. You were being a ghost, and now they want to make it permanent. She reached across the table, grabbing my hand. The sister I grew up with would never have let anyone treat her this way. What happened to her? She got lost, I whispered. Well, it's time to find her again. Claire squeezed my hand. But you have to be ready for what comes next. This isn't just about exposing them. It's about facing your own part in all this. What do you mean? You enabled them, Nick. Every time you stayed silent, every time you chose peace over truth, every time you pushed away people who saw through their act, you helped build this prison they've put you in. Her words stung because they were true. So what now? Now? A smile curved her lips. Now we plan a funeral, but first, you need somewhere safe to stay. Pack a bag. Tell Jonathan you're visiting a sick friend, someone he can't easily check on. Then come to my place. He'll be suspicious. Good. Let him squirm. Claire stood, dropping money on the table. And Nick, this time when I tell you something's wrong, try listening before 3 years pass. I watched my sister walk to her car, straight-backed and confident. The last time I'd seen her walk away, I'd chosen Jonathan's version of reality over hers. Now, I wondered how many other choices I'd need to unmake before this was over. My phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. Where are you, sweetheart? Getting worried. I typed back, helping Lauren with a crisis. Might be a long night. The lies came so easily now, but for the first time, they felt like armor instead of chains. You need to look sicker, Claire said, studying me across her kitchen island. They need to believe you're deteriorating naturally. 3 days had passed since I'd moved into her sleek downtown apartment. Jonathan had bought my story about Lauren's crisis, though his daily check-in calls grew increasingly probing. I've already started missing work, I said, scrolling through concerned texts from my fellow teachers. Selah's covering my class. Good, but we need more. Claire pushed a notebook toward me. I've been researching symptoms that match what Helen's likely planning: fatigue, confusion, weakness, classic signs of slow poisoning. You're scarily good at this. I prosecute white-collar crimes for a living. You'd be amazed how many involve spouse elimination. She poured more coffee. Speaking of which, I had my investigator friend look into Jonathan's finances. And he's been moving money around. Small amounts. Nothing suspicious on its own, but together? She slid over some papers. He's building a nest egg, one you can't trace. My hands shook as I read the numbers. He's been planning this for months. Years, probably. Men like Jonathan don't improvise murder over breakfast. Claire's phone buzzed. That's Lauren. You ready? I nodded. We'd decided to bring Lauren in, partially because she was my closest friend, but mostly because Jonathan would expect her to visit if I was truly sick. Lauren arrived looking worried, her usual bright energy dimmed. Nicole? Claire called and said, "Oh my God, what's going on?" I let Claire explain while I sat on the couch, playing the part of the weakening wife. Lauren's face went from confusion to horror to rage. That bastard! She jumped up, pacing. We have to call the police. And tell them what? Claire asked. That they're planning something? We need proof. So, what's the plan? Lauren collapsed back into an armchair. Because you obviously have one. Claire outlined our strategy, my gradually worsening condition, the carefully staged hospital visits, thanks to her contact in the ER, and finally, the piece de resistance, my apparent death and funeral. You want to let them think they succeeded? Lauren's eyes widened. That's brilliant and terrifying. We need witnesses, I said. People who'll remember their reactions, their behavior. People they can't control. Leave that to me, Lauren said, a gleam in her eye. I know exactly who to invite. Remember, Claire cautioned, this only works if they believe it's their plan succeeding. We have to be perfect. Speaking of perfect, Lauren turned to me. Have you thought about what happens after, when everything comes out? I hadn't. I'd been so focused on exposing their plan that I hadn't considered the aftermath. I'll figure it out. You'll stay with me, Claire said firmly. We've lost enough time already. A knock at the door made us all jump. Claire checked the security camera and swore softly. It's Corey. Jonathan's business partner? My heart raced. How did he know I was here? He doesn't. He's my neighbor. Claire straightened her blazer. Stay in the bedroom. Lauren, look like you're just leaving. I slipped into Claire's room, pressing my ear to the door. Claire, Corey's voice drifted through. Have you heard from Nicole? Jonathan's worried sick. Why would I have heard from my estranged sister? Come on, I know you two had issues, but if she's in trouble, the only trouble Nicole's ever had is letting other people make her decisions. Claire's voice was ice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work. The door closed, and I waited until I heard Corey's footsteps fade before emerging. He suspects something, Lauren said. Of course he does. He's Jonathan's watchdog. Claire was already typing on her phone, but this might work in our favor. His concern makes Nicole's illness more believable. I should call Jonathan, I said. Play up how tired I'm feeling. Perfect. Claire handed me a script she'd prepared. Remember, confused, weak, but trying to hide it. Make him think his plan is working. I dialed, heart pounding. Jonathan answered on the first ring. Sweetheart, where are you? Just at Lauren's still. I made my voice faint. I'm not feeling great, actually. Might see a doctor tomorrow. You do sound awful. Should I come get you? No, I caught myself. No, I mean, I don't want to risk getting you sick. I'll come home when I'm better. If you're sure, his concern sounded so genuine. I miss you. Miss you too. The words tasted like ash. After hanging up, I found Claire watching me intently. You know what's really sick? Part of me still wants to believe he loves me. That's how they get you, she said softly. They make you doubt your own reality until their version becomes truth. Lauren squeezed my hand. Not anymore. Now we're writing the story. I looked at these two women, my sister, who I'd pushed away, and my friend who'd stayed despite everything, and felt something I hadn't in years, strength. Claire? I picked up the notebook of symptoms. Let's make this performance Oscar-worthy. The emergency room's fluorescent lights made my staged pallor look even more convincing. Dr. Marcus, Claire's contact, had coached me well on how to present my symptoms. Mrs. Ryan, a nurse called, right on schedule. The doctor will see you now. Jonathan squeezed my hand, playing the concerned husband perfectly. He'd insisted on bringing me after I'd collapsed at home during my brief return. Helen hovered nearby, her nurse's training making her especially attentive to every detail. I'm sure it's nothing, I whispered, letting my voice shake. Dr. Marcus performed the examination exactly as we'd rehearsed. Blood pressure, heart rate, basic neurological tests, all designed to suggest something subtle but serious. I'd like to run some tests, he said, frowning at his chart. The symptoms you're describing are concerning. Helen stepped forward. What kind of symptoms are you thinking, doctor? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. He smiled professionally. We'll start with blood work and go from there. In the waiting room, while I was supposedly getting tests, I texted Claire from the private room Dr. Marcus had arranged. Me. They're buying it. Helen's practically salivating over the medical details. Claire. Perfect. Corey's been asking questions around the building. Stay alert. A knock at the door made me jump. Lauren slipped in, carrying a coffee cup. Helen's grilling the nurses about your symptoms, she whispered. She's really playing up the concerned mother-in-law act. Of course she is. She needs witnesses to remember how devastated she was. Jonathan's making calls, probably setting up his alibi. Dr. Marcus returned with the test results, his face appropriately grave. Mrs. Ryan, we've found some concerning irregularities. I'd like to admit you for observation. Is it serious? Jonathan asked, right on cue. We need to run more tests to be certain. The next few hours followed our script perfectly. I was admitted, hooked up to monitors, and subjected to a battery of inconclusive tests. Helen barely left my side, probably ensuring no real medication could interfere with whatever she was planning. Around midnight, I overheard her in the hallway with Jonathan. It's progressing faster than expected, she whispered. Maybe we should— Mom, not here. Jonathan's voice was sharp. Let nature take its course. I almost laughed at the irony. Their natural course was anything but. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Corey showed up, looking uncomfortable in the hospital setting. Nicole, he said, hovering by my bed. You look like death warmed over? I tried to joke, watching his face carefully. I was going to say tired. He glanced at the monitors. Jonathan's a mess, you know. Says you've been acting strange for weeks. Have I? I let my voice drift, as if confused. Everything's been so fuzzy lately. Corey leaned closer. If something's wrong, really wrong, you can tell me. For a moment, I was tempted. Corey had been Jonathan's friend since college, but there was genuine concern in his eyes. Nothing's wrong, I whispered. Just tired, so tired. He straightened as Jonathan returned with coffee. The two men exchanged looks I couldn't quite read. Later that afternoon, Sela visited with get-well cards from my students. Her sharp eyes took in everything: the monitors, the worried faces, Helen's hovering presence. The kids miss you, she said, arranging flowers by my bed. Then, quieter. Something feels off here, Nicole. Everything's fine, I replied, but squeezed her hand twice, our old signal from teacher training when we needed to talk privately. She got the message. I'll come back tomorrow, when you're stronger. Helen watched her leave. Such devoted colleagues you have. I'm lucky, I murmured, letting my eyes drift shut. Yes, she said softly. You are. That evening, Dr. Marcus announced my condition was deteriorating rapidly. The monitors showed increasingly concerning readings, all carefully programmed. We should transfer her to a specialist, he suggested. No, Helen jumped in. She's too weak for a transfer. She needs familiar surroundings, family care. I want to go home, I whispered, playing my part. Jonathan stroked my hair. Whatever you want, sweetheart. Lauren arrived as they were preparing my discharge papers. Her eyes met mine briefly. Everything was set. I'll help take care of her, she offered. I can work remotely. That's not necessary, Helen said quickly. Family should handle this. I'm practically family, Lauren insisted, her smile hiding steel. I pretended to drift off as they argued, but I caught Jonathan's whispered words to Helen. Let her help. It's better this way. Better to have witnesses to my natural decline, he meant. Better to have someone else see how devotedly they cared for me in my final days. As they wheeled me out to Jonathan's car, I thought about Corey's concerned face, Sela's subtle signal, Lauren's determined presence. They all sensed something wrong, even if they couldn't name it. Soon, they wouldn't have to. Soon everyone would know exactly what kind of people Jonathan and Helen really were. I just had to die first. The funeral home smelled of lilies and lies. I watched from a hidden alcove as mourners filed in, their black clothes stark against the cream-colored walls. Claire's contact in the mortuary business had arranged everything perfectly, including my hiding spot behind a two-way mirror. Such a tragedy, someone whispered. So young. My death had been perfectly orchestrated. A peaceful passing in my sleep, just as Helen had planned. though not by her hand. The medical examiner, another of Claire's connections, had ruled it as organ failure from an undiagnosed condition. Jonathan stood by my closed casket, accepting condolences with practiced grief. Helen sat in the front row, dabbing at dry eyes with a black handkerchief. "You okay?" Claire whispered beside me. "It's surreal," I replied, watching my kindergarten students place drawings on the casket. "Seeing your own funeral." Lauren arrived, leading a group of my colleagues. Selah's eyes were red, but sharp as they scanned the room. She paused at the casket, placing a hand on it, then whispered something to Lauren that made them both glance at Helen. "Your mother-in-law would like to say a few words," the funeral director announced. Helen approached the podium, the perfect picture of grieving elegance. "Nicole was more than my daughter-in-law," she began, her voice trembling. "She was the daughter I never had." Beside me, Claire made a disgusted sound. "We watched her struggle these past weeks," Helen continued, "her mysterious illness taking such a toll. If only we'd known sooner, perhaps." She paused, dabbing her eyes. "But Nicole wouldn't want us to dwell on what couldn't be changed. She lived her life serving others, her students, her friends, and most importantly, her beloved husband, my son." I felt bile rise in my throat. "Jonathan was her whole world," Helen said, looking at her son. "Everything she did was for him. Her dedication was absolute." The word choice wasn't accidental. Helen was painting a picture of a wife who lived only for her husband, making my death seem like the ultimate sacrifice. Corey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Next to him, Selah's expression had turned to stone. "I remember the last cup of tea we shared." Helen's voice cracked perfectly. She was so tired, but still insisted on using her special blue cups, always thinking of others, right until the end. My hands clenched into fists. The blue cups, the ones they'd planned to use for my murder. She was actually working them into her eulogy. "It's time," Claire whispered, checking her phone. Right on cue, Lauren stood up. "I'm sorry, but I can't listen to this anymore." The room froze. Helen's perfectly composed face cracked slightly. "Nicole was my best friend," Lauren continued, her voice carrying clearly, "and she was terrified the last few weeks of her life, not of dying, but of the people closest to her." "Lauren, please," Jonathan stepped forward. "This isn't the place. She told me things," Lauren pressed on, "about conversations she overheard, about plans being made, about special tea and blue cups." Helen's face went white. "Perhaps we should take a moment." The funeral director intervened. "No," Selah stood up. "Lauren's right. Something was wrong. Nicole came to me too, scared and confused, but not about her illness." Jonathan's mask of grief began to slip. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't we?" Claire's voice rang out as she entered from the back. "Because I have some interesting financial records that suggest otherwise, brother-in-law." The room erupted in whispers. Helen gripped the podium, knuckles white. "What are you implying?" she demanded. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm implying." Claire smiled coldly. "About insurance policies and medication and perfectly planned natural deaths." "This is outrageous," Jonathan sputtered. "We're here to mourn my wife." "Are we?" I stepped out from my hiding place. "Or are you here to celebrate a job well done?" The gasps were audible. Someone screamed. Helen staggered back from the podium, her face ashen. "Hello, Mother Helen," I said, walking toward her. "Would you like to finish telling everyone about that last cup of tea you had planned for me?" Jonathan moved toward the door, but Corey blocked his path. "Going somewhere, partner?" "Nicole," Helen whispered. "This isn't, we didn't what? Plan my funeral over breakfast? Discuss how to make my death look natural? Choose which poison would be untraceable?" The room had gone deathly quiet. Every eye was fixed on us, exactly as planned. "You're supposed to be dead," Jonathan said, his voice hollow. "Sorry to disappoint." I turned to address the stunned mourners. I apologize for the deception, but it seemed fitting. After all, they put so much effort into planning my funeral. I thought they should get to enjoy it. "You have no proof," Helen hissed, but her eyes darted to the doors. "Actually," Claire stepped forward, holding up her phone, "we have quite a lot of proof, including some very interesting recordings." As if on cue, Helen's voice filled the room from Claire's phone. Mixed into her evening tea, she'll just drift off. No pain, no mess. The funeral home erupted into chaos. But through it all, I kept my eyes locked on Jonathan and Helen, watching their carefully constructed world crumble around them. It wasn't the funeral they'd planned, but it was exactly the one they deserved. "You've ruined everything," Helen spat, her composure finally shattering. "Everything we built, everything we planned." "Everything you planned for me, you mean?" I stepped closer. "Tell them, Helen. Tell everyone how carefully you planned my death." The funeral home had erupted into a mix of shocked murmurs and ringing phones as people called the police. Jonathan remained frozen, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You don't understand," he said, reaching for me. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I jerked away from his touch. "By killing me? From yourself." Helen's voice rose hysterically. "Look at you, so ungrateful, so selfish. We gave you everything." "You gave me nothing except chains," I shot back. "You controlled every aspect of my life until there was nothing left of me." "We made you better," Helen insisted. "Before us, you were nothing, just a kindergarten teacher with delusions of independence." Selah stepped forward. "Those delusions of independence? We call that being a human being, Helen." "Stay out of this," Jonathan snapped. "This is family business." "Family?" Lauren laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call plotting to murder your wife?" Two police officers entered the funeral home, followed by Claire, who must have called them earlier. The room grew quiet as they approached. "That's them," Claire said, pointing to Jonathan and Helen. "I have recordings and financial documents proving their conspiracy to commit murder." "This is ridiculous," Jonathan tried to regain control. "Officers, my wife is clearly unstable." "Play the recording," I interrupted. "The one from this morning, Helen, about the blue cups." Claire pressed play on her phone, and Helen's voice filled the room again, detailing exactly how they'd planned to poison me. The officers exchanged glances and moved toward them. "You want to know why?" Helen's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "Because you were destroying him. Your neediness, your friends, your pathetic little job. You were holding him back." "Mrs. Ryan," one officer started. "He could have been everything," Helen shouted. "But you made him weak, just like my husband made me weak." The room went still. Even Jonathan turned to stare at his mother. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Your father?" Helen's laugh was bitter. "He was just like her, always wanting love, attention, connection. Disgusting. He made me stay home, raise you, give up my career. And for what? So he could die and leave us with nothing?" "Mom," Jonathan's face had gone pale. "I promised myself you'd be different," she continued, her words tumbling out. "Strong, independent. But then you married her, and I saw it happening all over again. The same weakness, the same dependency." "So you decided to kill me?" I asked softly. "To save Jonathan from becoming like his father? To save him from becoming nothing?" Helen's composure cracked completely. "I didn't spend 30 years building him up just to watch some schoolteacher tear him down." The officers moved forward, handcuffs ready. Helen didn't resist as they read her rights, her eyes fixed on Jonathan. I did it for you, she whispered. Everything was for you. Jonathan stood frozen as they led his mother away. When the second officer approached him, he seemed to wake up. Nicole, he pleaded, you know I love you. We can fix this. Fix this. I gestured around the funeral home. You planned my murder, Jonathan. You sat in our kitchen and discussed how to kill me like you were planning a dinner party. I didn't. She convinced me. No, I cut him off. You chose this. Every step of the way, you chose this. The officer took Jonathan's arm. He went quietly, looking lost and somehow smaller than I'd ever seen him. As they led him out, Corey approached me. I knew something was wrong, but this, I never imagined. None of us did. Lauren put her arm around my shoulders. The funeral home slowly emptied, leaving me with Claire, Lauren, and Sella. The closed casket still stood at the front, covered in children's drawings. What happens now? Sela asked. Now? Claire checked her phone. Now the media gets hold of this, and we make sure everyone knows exactly what they tried to do. And me? I touched one of my students' drawings, a bright rainbow with "We love you, Ms. Nicole" written in crooked letters. You live, Lauren said simply. You teach, you laugh, you exist. Everything they tried to stop you from doing. I looked around the room that was supposed to witness my final goodbye. Instead, it had witnessed my rebirth. Helen was wrong, you know, Sela said quietly, about weakness and love being the same thing. Your love for your students, your friends, that's what saved you. No, I corrected her, thinking of Helen's revelation about her past. Understanding saved me. Understanding that their strength was really fear and their control was really weakness. Claire squeezed my hand. Ready to get out of here? I think we've had enough of funerals. I nodded, taking one last look at the room. Yes, I think it's time to start living again. The courthouse hallway buzzed with tension as we waited for Jonathan and Helen's bail hearing to begin. I sat between Claire and Lauren, watching reporters scribble in their notepads. Ms. Ryan? A man approached, his face hauntingly familiar. I'm Randy, Helen's brother. I stiffened, but Claire touched my arm. It's okay. He reached out to me yesterday. Randy looked nothing like his sister. Where Helen was all sharp edges and cold precision, he carried a gentle warmth. I need to tell you something, he said, sitting across from us. About Helen and why she became this. We already know about her husband, I started. No, you don't. Randy's eyes clouded. You know her version. The truth is different. Lauren leaned forward. What do you mean? Our father was... Randy paused, choosing his words carefully. He believed in control, absolute control. Helen learned early that love meant ownership. When she married Thomas, Jonathan's father, she finally had someone who showed her real love. But she said he made her weak, I said. Randy laughed bitterly. Thomas made her human. He encouraged her to keep nursing, to have friends, to live. But she couldn't handle it. Real love terrified her more than our father's control ever did. So what happened? Claire asked, her lawyer's instincts engaged. She poisoned him. Randy's words fell like stones. Slowly, over months. Everyone thought it was heart failure. I only found out years later when she was drunk at Christmas and confessed. The hallway seemed to spin. Did Jonathan know? No, but she raised him in our father's image, teaching him that love was weakness, that control was strength. Randy rubbed his face. I should have spoken up sooner, when I saw how she was with you. Why tell us now? Claire demanded. Because the police found Thomas's old medical records. They're reopening his case. Randy handed Claire a folder. Here's everything I know. Maybe it can help make sure she never hurts anyone else. Before I could respond, the courtroom doors opened. As we filed in, I caught sight of Jonathan. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his eyes darting between me and Helen. Helen sat ramrod straight, her expression blank, until she saw Randy. Something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. The hearing proceeded quickly. No bail for either of them. Flight risks, the judge said. As they were led away, Helen suddenly turned. Randy, her voice cracked. Tell them about Father. Tell them why I had to be strong. No, Helen. Randy replied quietly. Tell them about Thomas. Tell them what strength really cost you. She crumpled then, years of careful control dissolving as officers led her away. Jonathan watched his mother's breakdown with dawning horror. Nicole, he called out, I didn't know. About my father. I didn't know. Would it have changed anything? I asked. His silence was answer enough. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Claire handled them expertly while Lauren shielded me from the cameras. Randy hung back, looking lost. Thank you, I told him, for telling the truth. I should have done it years ago. He handed me an envelope. These are Thomas's last letters to Helen. He knew something was wrong, but he never stopped loving her. Maybe that was his real strength. Later that evening, in Claire's apartment, we read the letters. Thomas's words painted a picture of a man who saw his wife's darkness but chose to meet it with light until the very end. Listen to this, Claire read aloud. My dearest Helen, I know you're afraid of what love might make you. But love doesn't make us weak. It gives us the courage to be vulnerable. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to understand that. He never got the chance, Lauren said softly. No, I replied, thinking of Jonathan. And she made sure their son never would either. Selah arrived with dinner and news from school. The parents are being amazing. They want you back whenever you're ready. Really? Even after everything? Especially after everything. She smiled. You showed those kids that standing up to bullies isn't just something we teach, it's something we live. My phone buzzed with a text from Corey. Found more financial records. Claire was right. They've been planning this for years. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. It's not your fault, I texted back. We all saw what they wanted us to see. Claire poured wine for everyone except Randy, who preferred coffee. We sat in her living room, this strange group brought together by tragedy, but bound now by something stronger. To karma, Lauren raised her glass. May it always find its mark. To truth, Randy added quietly. To strength, Claire said, looking at me. The real kind. I thought about Thomas's letters, about Helen's twisted version of love, about Jonathan learning the wrong lessons from both his parents. To healing, I said finally, and to starting over. As we clinked glasses, I realized that this messy, honest, imperfect connection was what Helen had feared most. Not weakness, but the strength it takes to be truly seen and known by others. And for the first time since this all began, I felt genuinely, completely free. The kindergarten classroom buzzed with energy as my students worked on their art projects. Bright paper hearts covered the walls, their welcome back gift to me. Ms. Nicole, Sarah tugged my sleeve. Is it true you're a superhero now? I knelt beside her desk. What makes you think that? My mommy said you fought bad guys and won. She beamed. Like Wonder Woman. Not exactly like Wonder Woman, I laughed, but I did learn something important, that being brave doesn't mean being alone. The classroom door opened and Claire stepped in, carrying a manila envelope. The kids waved. They'd met my sister during our weekly lunch visits. Court documents, she whispered, handing me the envelope. They both took the plea deal. My hands trembled slightly as I read. 20 years for Helen. The evidence from Thomas's case had sealed her fate. 15 for Jonathan, with no possibility of early release. The DA says Randy's testimony was crucial, Claire added. He's thinking about writing a book about Helen and Thomas. Good, I said. watching my students create their artwork. Some stories need to be told. The afternoon bell rang, and parents began arriving. Lauren appeared with them, carrying coffee and her laptop. "Ready for our house hunting session?" she asked. "I found some great places near the school." "Actually," Claire interrupted, "I had a thought about that." She pulled out her phone, showing us photos of a beautiful craftsman house with a wraparound porch. "It's 2 blocks from me," she said. "3 bedrooms, perfect for a fresh start. And," she hesitated, "maybe room for a roommate if you want company while you adjust." Tears pricked my eyes. "You want to live together?" "Well, we have a lot of time to make up for." She shrugged, trying to look casual. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't subsist entirely on takeout." Lauren clapped her hands. "Perfect. I'll call the realtor right now." "Ms. Nicole?" Another student, Marcus, approached. "I made this for you." He handed me a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. "Is that me?" I asked. "You and your sister," he said proudly. "Mom says family is supposed to hold hands, not hurt." Out of the mouths of babes. The classroom slowly emptied until only Selah remained, helping me clean up. "The school board approved your proposal," she said. "We're starting the emotional awareness program next semester." I smiled, remembering how the idea had come to me during therapy, teaching children early about healthy relationships and recognizing manipulation. "Helen would hate it," I said, "teaching kids to trust their feelings instead of suppressing them." "Good thing she'll be busy for the next couple decades." My phone buzzed. A text from Corey. "Finished transferring all company assets to new ownership. Jonathan can't touch any of it now. Dinner next week to celebrate?" "Speaking of celebration," Claire said, reading over my shoulder, "Lauren's planning a housewarming party once you're settled. She's invited half the courthouse." "Including Randy?" "He's bringing Thomas's old photo albums. Said you might want to see who Jonathan could have been if things had been different." I looked around my classroom, at the bright artwork, the tiny desks, the safe space we'd created here, then at my sister, who'd never stopped believing in me, even when I'd stopped believing in myself. "You know what Helen never understood?" I said, picking up Marcus's drawing. "Real strength isn't about control or power. It's about having the courage to stay open even after being hurt. Like teaching kindergarten after everything that happened?" Selah smiled. "Like letting my sister back into my life," I corrected. "Like building something new instead of hiding from what was broken." Claire wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Ready to go home?" "Almost." I walked to my desk and pulled out the blue teacups, the ones Helen had planned to use for my murder. I'd kept them as a reminder. "What are you going to do with those?" Lauren asked. I handed one to each of them. "We're going to break them, together, then use the pieces for an art project with the kids, turning something meant for harm into something beautiful." "Now that," Claire said, "is real karma." We each held a cup, these delicate things that had almost been weapons. "To new beginnings," Lauren said. "To chosen family," Selah added. "To real strength." Claire smiled at me. I lifted my cup. "To living." The sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the classroom like music. Tomorrow, these shards would become part of a mosaic, broken pieces creating something whole and new, just like me. As we gathered the pieces, I thought about Helen in her cell, Jonathan in his, both trapped by their own versions of strength. And here I was, surrounded by love, creating art from destruction. Maybe that's what real power looks like, not the ability to break things, but the courage to piece them back together, differently and beautifully. "Come on," Claire said, gathering her things. "Let's go find you a home." I took one last look at my classroom, at the hearts on the walls, at the broken cups waiting to become something new. "I already have one," I said, following my sister out the door. I just had to fight to find it.
My name is Tessa, and I've been working in Europe for about a year now. It's been a good change for me, new experiences, new people, a fresh start. Back home, I left behind my parents and my younger sister Janet, though honestly, we weren't exactly what you'd call a close-knit family. Janet and I have this weird relationship, if you can even call it that. She's 8 years younger than me, which meant we were always at different stages of life. When I was dealing with high school drama, she was still playing with dolls. By the time she hit her teenage years, I was already out of college and focused on my career. We basically lived in different worlds, only crossing paths during family dinners and holidays. These days, our communication has dwindled to nothing more than exchanging happy birthday and Merry Christmas messages. Before moving abroad, I had my own place back home, a nice apartment that actually used to belong to my grandmother. It's funny how that came about. After college, I landed a good job in finance and started making decent money. 3 years into my career, I decided it was time to stop renting and buy my own place. That's when my parents mentioned the apartment my grandmother had left to Mom in her will. "We've been renting it out," Mom told me over dinner one night. "But if you're interested, we could sell it to you." The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. I knew that apartment like the back of my hand, all those Sunday afternoons spent visiting Grandma, helping her water her beloved plants on the balcony, eating her famous chocolate chip cookies in the cozy kitchen. The price they offered was fair, and the location was great. So I bought it, paid them $120,000, and made it my home for the next 3 years. Then the opportunity in Europe came up. It was too good to pass up: better salary, chance to travel, new challenges. I kept the apartment, of course. It was my first real investment, and I figured I could always rent it out or come back to it someday. I was sitting at my desk in my Brussels apartment, going through some work emails, when my phone lit up with Janet's name. I actually did a double take. We hadn't had a real conversation in what felt like forever. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, wondering if something was wrong. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "Tessa, hi." Janet sounded cheerful, which was both relieving and confusing. "How are you? How's work going? Are you seeing anyone?" The questions came rapid fire, as if we were close sisters who regularly caught up on each other's lives. I told her about my job, mentioned that I was single but focusing on my career, and admitted I wasn't sure when I'd be coming back home. "That's actually perfect," Janet said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I just started college. Did Mom and Dad tell you?" "No, they didn't mention it," I replied. "We hadn't talked much lately either." "Well, I did, and guess what? I talked to Mom and Dad, and they said I could stay in your apartment while I'm in college." "Isn't that great? It's only 2 blocks from campus, so I won't have to spend money on transportation. Plus, I won't have to pay rent, which is a huge help." I gripped my phone tighter, trying to process what I'd just heard. The casual way Janet announced her plans to move into my apartment made my blood boil. Taking a deep breath, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Janet, wait a minute," I cut into her enthusiastic planning. "You can't just decide to move in there. You should have asked me about this first, not Mom and Dad." "Asked you?" Janet sounded genuinely confused. "Why?" "Mom and Dad already said it was fine." I pinched the bridge of my nose, fighting back my growing frustration. "Because you need my permission, not theirs. You can't just move in there because they said so." "But they said." "I don't care what they said," I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. I softened my voice slightly. "Look, Janet, I appreciate that you're trying to figure out your living situation, but this isn't going to work." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Janet spoke again, her voice had that same maddeningly calm tone our mother used when she thought she was being reasonable. "I don't see why not. You're in Europe, the apartment is just sitting there empty." "It's not sitting empty," I corrected her. "And what happens when I decide to come home?" I could return from Europe at any time. Where am I supposed to live then? Janet let out a small laugh that made my jaw clench. Oh, come on, Tessa. You make really good money at your job. If you come back, you can just rent another place. It's not like you can't afford it. I sat there in stunned silence. The sheer audacity of her suggestion, that I should rent another apartment while she lived rent-free in mine, left me speechless for a moment. The assumption that because I had a good job, I should just give up my home to her, it was unbelievable. No, I said firmly, my voice cold. Absolutely not. I'm not going to rent another place just so you can live there for free. This isn't happening, Janet. But Mom and Dad. I don't care what Mom and Dad said, I nearly shouted. The answer is no. Without waiting for her response, I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking as I set it down on my desk. I spent the next few hours trying to distract myself with work, but I couldn't focus. The conversation with Janet kept replaying in my head. I knew it wasn't over. In our family, nothing ever ended with just one conversation. Sure enough, just as I was heating up leftovers for dinner, my phone started buzzing. Mom's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice, taking deep breaths and preparing myself for what was coming. Finally, I answered. Hello? Tessa. My mother's voice had that particular tone I knew all too well, the one that meant I was in trouble, like I was still a teenager who'd broken curfew. We need to talk about what happened with Janet. I moved to my couch, abandoning my dinner. Yeah, I guess we do. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this, she started in. You shouldn't treat your sister like this. She's family. It's just for a little while she's in college. Nothing terrible will happen if Janet stays in the apartment. I ran my fingers through my hair, fighting to keep my voice level. Mom, I can't just let her move in there. What happens when she doesn't want to leave? I'm not going to end up fighting with my sister to get her out of my apartment. Oh, don't be dramatic, Mom scoffed. That won't happen. You don't know that, I countered. Besides, why can't you guys help her rent her own place? Why does it have to be my apartment? There was a slight pause before Mom answered, we've already spent all our money on Janet's college tuition. We can't afford to pay rent on top of that. I stood up and started pacing my living room. Well, I don't want her living there. Who knows what could happen to the place? And besides, I'm renting it out right now. I'm getting income from that apartment. If Janet moves in, I'll be the one paying the bills while she lives there for free. Well, I could hear her trying to think of a response. Unless, I added, you and Dad want to pay me rent for Janet to live there? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then my mother's voice came back, sharp and angry. I can't believe how brazen and selfish you're being. Demanding rent from your own sister? What's gotten into you? Selfish? Now I was the one getting angry. How is it selfish to want to keep my own apartment? The apartment that I bought with my own money? Or did you forget that I paid you and Dad $120,000 for it? That has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with this. I was practically shouting now. I didn't get this apartment for free. I bought it with my money. My hard-earned money. The line went dead. The next week dragged by in complete silence. No calls from Mom, no messages from Janet, nothing. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach that grew bigger each day. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, but it was never them. I was in the middle of a presentation at work when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. I ignored it, but whoever it was called 3 more times. During my lunch break, I finally checked. It was Aunt Sarah, Mom's sister. We weren't particularly close, but she'd always been the voice of reason in family disputes. Tessa, her familiar voice came through the line. What's going on with your family? I just talked to your mother, and she seemed, well, not herself. I sighed and closed my office door. It's a mess, Aunt Sarah. Over the next 20 minutes, I poured out the whole story: Janet's call, Mom's reaction, everything. Aunt Sarah listened without interrupting, making only small sounds of acknowledgement. "I see," she said when I finished. "Have you tried talking to Janet again?" Calmly, "I mean? It sounds like there might be some misunderstanding here." "What's there to misunderstand?" I asked, slumping in my chair. "They want my apartment for Janet, end of story." "Honey," Aunt Sarah's voice was gentle but firm, "sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem. Call your sister. Video call her, so you can see each other's faces. Try to understand where she's coming from, and make sure she understands where you're coming from too." I wanted to resist, but something in her tone made me reconsider. Maybe she was right. Maybe we needed to clear the air. That evening, after work, I took a deep breath and initiated a video call with Janet. To my surprise, she answered almost immediately. She looked tired, her usually neat hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Can we talk?" Janet nodded, her expression guarded. "I need to understand something," I started. "Why are you so set on living in this particular apartment? Why not rent your own place?" Janet's face hardened slightly. "Why should I rent somewhere else when Mom and Dad said I could stay in their apartment? You lived there for 4 years, now it's my turn. They said it was fine." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Their apartment?" "Yeah," Janet said, lifting her chin. "Mom and Dad's apartment. They inherited it from Grandma, remember? They said I could live there while I'm in college, just like you did." For a moment, I just stared at her through the screen. Then, without a word, I reached for my laptop and pulled up my files. "Janet, I need to show you something." I shared my screen and opened the folder containing my property documents. "This isn't Mom and Dad's apartment. It hasn't been for years. Look at the date on this deed of sale. Look at the purchase agreement. I bought this apartment from them. I paid them $120,000 for it." The silence that followed was absolute. Janet's eyes widened as she scanned the documents, her mouth falling slightly open. But that's impossible," she whispered. "They told me, they said." She shook her head. "This doesn't make any sense. Why would they lie about this? How could they forget selling you the apartment?" I watched Janet's face on my screen as she processed the documents I'd shown her. She looked pale, confused, and somehow younger than she had just moments before. I felt a sudden surge of sympathy for my sister. "Well," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "at least the money went to a good cause. Mom told me they used it to pay for your college tuition." Janet's head snapped up. "What?" "The money from the apartment sale," I explained. "Mom said they spent it on your education." Janet let out a strange laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Tessa, I'm on a full scholarship. Mom and Dad haven't paid a cent for my education." Now it was my turn to stare in shock. But Mom just told me last week that they couldn't help you with rent because they'd spent all the money on your tuition." We sat in stunned silence, both processing this new revelation. Then Janet spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you remember when I wanted those dance classes in middle school?" she asked. "Mom told me they couldn't afford it because they'd just bought you a new laptop for college." "What?" I shook my head. "I never got a laptop from them. I saved up from my summer job to buy one." Janet leaned closer to her screen. "And remember that summer camp I wanted to go to? The one all my friends were attending? Mom said they couldn't send me because they'd just paid for your college application fees. But I applied for fee waivers," I said slowly. "I handled all my college applications myself because they told me they'd spent all their money on your new school uniforms." "School uniforms?" Janet's eyebrows shot up. "My school didn't even have uniforms." We spent the next hour trading stories, each one more revealing than the last. A pattern emerged: whenever either of us had asked for something, our parents had blamed their inability to provide it on having just spent money on the other sister. It was like putting together a puzzle where none of the pieces matched the picture we'd grown up believing. The next morning, I called Aunt Sarah. My head was spinning from everything Janet and I had discovered, and I needed someone else's perspective. "Aunt Sarah," I said as soon as she answered, "I talked to Janet last night. We found out that Mom and Dad have been lying to us. For years. They'd tell each one of us they couldn't buy something because they'd spent money on the other, but none of it was true. They told Janet the apartment was still theirs when they'd sold it to me years ago. They told me they spent the money from the sale on Janet's college, but she's on scholarship. Nothing adds up." I heard Aunt Sarah take a deep breath on the other end of the line. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with what sounded like long-held guilt. "Tessa, honey, sit down. There's something I need to tell you about your parents. Something I should have told you years ago. I didn't want to cause problems in the family, but, well, I think it's time you knew the truth about how your parents really treated you and your sister." I sat on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, waiting for Aunt Sarah to continue. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes before she finally spoke again, her voice heavy with regret. "Your parents, they weren't what you thought they were, Tessa. They weren't struggling to make ends meet, like they always claimed. Your grandmother, she gave them money every month, a substantial amount, specifically for you and Janet." My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you mean, specifically for us?" "She wanted to make sure her granddaughters were well taken care of," Aunt Sarah explained. "But your parents, they spent that money on themselves instead. The bare minimum went to you girls. They'd buy the cheapest groceries for home, get you the most basic necessities, while they—" She paused, as if struggling with the words. "While they what?" I prompted, though part of me didn't want to know. "While they lived like royalty, behind everyone's backs. They were always eating at expensive restaurants, shopping at high-end stores. And those trips they took? 2 or 3 times a year? Their business trips?" I felt my stomach drop. "Mom and Dad always said they had to travel for work. There were no business trips, Tessa. They were luxury vacations. They'd leave you girls with your grandmother, telling her they were going somewhere with an unsuitable climate for children. In reality, they were staying at 5-star resorts, going on cruises, living it up while you and Janet stayed behind." Memories started flooding back, all those times they'd drop us off at Grandma's, their matching designer suitcases in the car trunk. I remembered how excited they'd always looked before these business trips, how they'd come back tanned and relaxed. It all made horrible sense now. "How did you find out?" I managed to ask. Aunt Sarah sighed deeply. "It was an accident. I ran into your mother at a restaurant one day, a very expensive one, when she was supposed to be on a business trip. She was wearing a brand new designer outfit, jewelry I'd never seen before. When I confronted her about it, she trailed off, and I could hear the pain in her voice when she continued. Your mother threatened me, Tessa. She said if I told your grandmother about any of this, she would turn her against me. She knew how to manipulate your grandmother, had her completely convinced that she could do no wrong. Your mother said she'd make sure I was cut out of the inheritance entirely. And you kept this secret all this time? I couldn't keep the accusation out of my voice. We had a huge fight about it, Aunt Sarah's voice cracked. Your mother and I didn't speak for years after that. And yes, I kept quiet. I'm so ashamed of that now, Tessa. I should have spoken up, should have done something. But I was afraid, and I'm so sorry. You and Janet deserved better than this. You deserved to know the truth. I sat in stunned silence as my aunt's revelations sank in. All those years, all those memories of careful budgeting and modest living, it had all been a lie. My parents hadn't been struggling, they'd been splurging. Just not on us. I can't believe this, I finally managed to say. We lived so frugally. Mom would spend hours cutting coupons, telling us we had to be careful with money. They never took us on a single vacation, not one. Everything Janet and I owned came from sale racks or discount stores. Even our groceries. I let out a bitter laugh. Mom would drive across town to shop at the cheaper supermarket, saying we had to watch every penny. I stood up and started pacing my apartment, too agitated to sit still. And you know what the worst part is? They made us feel guilty for wanting things. Normal things that kids want. They'd lecture us about being materialistic if we asked for new clothes or wanted to go on school trips. Tessa, Aunt Sarah started, but I couldn't stop now. And college. God, the college thing makes me so angry now. Do you know what they told me? From the time I was little, they drilled it into my head that they couldn't afford to help with college. They said I had to study hard and get scholarships because there was no other way. I spent my entire high school career terrified of getting anything less than perfect grades because I thought my future depended on it. I could hear the strain in my voice, years of stress and anxiety bubbling to the surface. I worked so hard for those scholarships, Aunt Sarah. So did Janet. We both did. And now you're telling me. Your grandmother made specific provisions in her will, Aunt Sarah cut in quietly. She left your mother extra money, a significant amount, specifically earmarked for both of your college educations. It was a condition of the inheritance. Your mother was supposed to use that money to put both you and Janet through college. The phone nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. What? Your grandmother wanted to make sure both her granddaughters would get a good education. She knew how important that was. I sank back onto the couch, feeling like all the air had been knocked out of me. But Janet and I both went to college on scholarships. They never gave us a penny for tuition. They told us they couldn't afford it. I know, Aunt Sarah said softly. They kept all that money for themselves, just like they kept the monthly allowance your grandmother gave them for your care. The next morning, I requested an emergency vacation from work. My boss must have heard something in my voice, because he approved it immediately. Within 48 hours, I was on a plane home. Janet met me at the airport, and we spent the entire drive to her dorm room, talking about everything Aunt Sarah had revealed. I can't believe they did this to us, Janet kept saying, gripping the steering wheel so tight, her knuckles were white. All those times they made us feel guilty for wanting things. We arrived at our parents' house that afternoon. It was strange how normal everything looked, the same well-maintained lawn, the same expensive car in the driveway that they'd claimed was a necessary business expense. How many lies had we believed over the years? Mom answered the door with a smile that quickly faded when she saw both of us standing there. Girls? What's this about? We need to talk, I said firmly, walking past her into the house. Where's Dad? In his study, she replied, following us as we made our way through the house. What's going on? We found Dad sitting at his desk, reading something on his tablet. He looked up in surprise as we all filed into the room. Well, this is unexpected. We know everything, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. About the money Grandma gave you for us every month. About the money she left specifically for our college education. About all of it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mom's face went blank, while Dad slowly put down his tablet. Aunt Sarah told us, Janet added into the silence. About how you spent the money on yourselves. About your fancy restaurants and expensive vacations while we were eating budget groceries and shopping at discount stores. I expected denial. I expected anger. What I didn't expect was my mother's calm, almost dismissive response. Well, she said, straightening her designer blouse, I don't see what there is to discuss. We did nothing wrong. We fed you, clothed you, raised you. No one can accuse us of child abuse. Nothing wrong? I felt my voice rising. You took money that Grandma gave you specifically for us and spent it on yourselves. We lived the lifestyle we deserved, Dad chimed in, his voice equally unperturbed. It was our money to spend as we saw fit. Your money? Janet's voice cracked. It was Grandma's money. She gave it to you for us. Mom waved her hand dismissively. What's done is done. You can't prove anything now anyway. The money's long gone. The casual way they admitted it, without a hint of shame or remorse, felt like a physical blow. They weren't even trying to deny it anymore, they simply didn't care. "You know what?" I said, suddenly feeling very calm. "You're right. The money's gone. But so is our relationship with you." Janet and I walked out of that house and never looked back. That was 6 months ago. Things are different now. Better, in many ways. Janet and I talk almost every day. I helped her find a nice apartment near campus, and I cover her rent. It's the least I can do for my little sister. She found a part-time job at a local coffee shop to cover her other expenses, insisting on being as independent as possible. Last week, Janet and I had dinner together at her new place. We talked and laughed for hours, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Looking at her across the table, I realized something. Our parents might have stolen our money, but they accidentally gave us something valuable in return. In trying to keep us apart with their lies, they ended up bringing us closer together than ever before. My name is Brittany, and at 28, I'd managed to build what most would consider a pretty good life for myself. After years of hard work, I had landed a position at one of the most prestigious companies in the city. The salary was excellent, and I had finally achieved one of my biggest dreams, buying my own apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, paid for with my own money, and that made it perfect. I remember that day clearly. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when my younger sister Ashley showed up at my door unannounced. At 23, she still lived with our parents, which had never seemed to bother her before. She'd always been content letting them support her while she figured out her life, as she put it. But this time, something was different. As soon as I let her in, I noticed her eyes darting around my apartment with an intensity I'd never seen before. She wandered from room to room, touching things, examining everything as if she was seeing it all for the first time, even though she'd been here countless times before. "Your place is so nice, Britt," she said, running her hand along my kitchen counter. "You're so lucky." I couldn't help but laugh. "Lucky? Ashley, I worked my ass off for this place. You know that." She turned to face me, and I was surprised to see tears welling up in her eyes. "I can't take it anymore," she burst out. "Living with Mom and Dad, it's suffocating me. They're suppressing all my aspirations for independence." I nearly choked on my coffee. This was rich coming from Ashley, who had never shown the slightest interest in being independent before. "Since when?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. "Last time we talked, you were pretty happy having Mom do your laundry and Dad paying your phone bill." "That's exactly the problem." She pulled out her phone and started quoting something. "According to Dr. Martinez's book on adult-child-parent relationships, this is classic codependency. If I don't break free from the parental umbilical cord now, I'll be stuck there forever, just withering away." I set my coffee down and looked at her hard. "Ashley, what exactly are you asking me?" She took a deep breath, and there it was, the real reason for her visit. "I need your help, Britt. I want to move out, but I need money for the first 3 months of rent. I'll find a job right away, and then I'll be completely self-sufficient. Just like you." Maybe it was the way she said, "just like you," that got me. Or maybe I was just tired of worrying about her never growing up. Whatever it was, I heard myself saying, "Okay, I'll help you." The squeal she let out probably could have been heard 3 floors down. She threw her arms around me, nearly knocking me over. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the best sister ever, Britt. You won't regret this, I promise." A week after our conversation, Ashley burst into my apartment waving her phone in the air like she'd just won the lottery. "Britt, I found the perfect places. You have to see these." I was in the middle of making dinner, but she practically dragged me to my couch. As she started scrolling through the listings, my eyes nearly popped out of my head. The first apartment she showed me was in Riverside Towers, one of the most expensive complexes in the city. Look at this view, she gushed. And it has a rooftop pool, gym, and even a concierge. Ashley, I said slowly, this place is $2,800 a month. But it comes with parking. She swiped to the next listing. Okay, this one's a bit cheaper, only $2,500. But look at the marble countertops. I put my hand over her phone. Stop. These places are completely out of the question. I pulled up my laptop and showed her a listing I'd found earlier. Here, this is more realistic. It's a one-bedroom in a good neighborhood, comes furnished with basic appliances, and the rent is reasonable. Ashley wrinkled her nose as she looked at the photos. But it's so basic. It's clean, safe, and perfectly nice for a first apartment, I said firmly. In fact, it's nicer than my first place was. Plus, it's within walking distance of several businesses where you could apply for jobs. She slumped back on my couch, clearly disappointed. I guess. Look, I said, trying to be patient, this is exactly the kind of place you need while you're getting established. Once you have a steady job and your own income, you can upgrade if you want. After what felt like an hour of convincing, she finally agreed to look at my suggestion. The next day, we met with the realtor, a cheerful woman named Linda, who walked us through the apartment. It was exactly as advertised, modest but pleasant, with decent furniture and working appliances. Ashley kept making faces when she thought I wasn't looking, but I ignored her. We'll take it, I told Linda, pulling out my checkbook. I wrote checks for both the security deposit and 3 months' rent, while Ashley signed the lease agreement. As she scribbled her signature, I felt a mix of pride and anxiety. This was really happening. Over the next few weeks, I called Ashley regularly to check on her job search. Her answers became increasingly evasive. During our last call, I finally lost my patience. Ashley, I'm not going to pay your rent indefinitely. You need to find work. Don't worry about it, she said dismissively, and before I could respond, she hung up on me. I stared at my phone in disbelief, a sinking feeling in my stomach that my sister's version of independence might be very different from mine. 3 months flew by faster than I expected. I was knee-deep in a project at work when my phone buzzed. Ashley's name flashed across the screen, and for a moment, I hoped she was calling with good news about a job. I couldn't have been more wrong. Hey, Britt, she said, her voice casual as if she was about to comment on the weather. Just reminding you that the rent's due by the 15th. You'll need to transfer money for the next 3 months. I nearly dropped my coffee. Ashley, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, we had an agreement. You were supposed to get a job and start paying your own rent. That was the whole point of this, becoming independent, remember? Oh, come on, she interrupted, not even letting me finish. I haven't found the right position yet, but I'm totally on my way to it. These things take time, you know? No, I don't know, I snapped. You've had 3 months to find something, anything. You wanted independence so badly, remember? Well, independent people pay their own bills. She hung up with such force I could practically feel it through the phone. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding but feeling proud that I'd finally stood my ground. That feeling lasted exactly 15 minutes. My phone rang again, this time it was Mom. My stomach dropped before I even answered. Brittany Marie Thompson. Mom's voice came through like a tornado. How dare you refuse to help your sister? She called me crying. Mom, I've already paid for 3 months of rent. The whole point was for her to become independent. Independent? She cut me off. She's your sister. Family helps family, that's what we do. You have a good job, a good salary. You can afford to help her. But Mom, do you want her to end up homeless? Is that what you want? To see your sister out on the street? The guilt trip was coming on strong, and I felt my resolve weakening. Mom kept going, her voice a mix of disappointment and accusation that she'd perfected over the years. The worst part was, I knew exactly what was happening. I knew I was being manipulated. But knowing didn't make it any easier to resist. Fine, I said finally, my voice tight. I'll pay for 3 more months. But that's it. This is the last time. That's my girl, Mom said, her voice immediately warming. I knew you'd do the right thing. After hanging up, I transferred the money and sent Ashley a text, rent paid for 3 more months. This is absolutely the last time. I mean it. Her response came seconds later, a single emoji, a smiling face with a halo. The innocence of the emoji felt like a slap in the face, and I knew right then that I'd made another mistake. But what could I do? She was my sister, and Mom was right about one thing: I could afford it. A week after that, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I decided to check Ashley's Instagram. I hadn't looked at it in a while, and what I saw made my blood pressure spike. There she was, posing in my apartment, the one I was paying for, like some kind of lifestyle influencer. Photo after photo showed her lounging on the furniture, standing by the window with the perfect morning light, and arranged artfully on the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee. The captions were even worse. Living my best, authentic life. Being true to yourself is the greatest gift. Sometimes you have to choose your own path. Trust the journey. I scrolled through weeks of posts, my jaw clenching tighter with each swipe. Not a single mention of job hunting. Not one word about looking for work or becoming self-sufficient. Just endless selfies and pseudo-philosophical quotes about following your dreams. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened our messenger chat and typed, "When are you actually going to start looking for work?" The response came so fast, I wondered if she'd been waiting for me to ask. A photo appeared in our chat, an official-looking email with a company letterhead. It was an invitation to a job interview, complete with date, time, and location. My heart lifted. Finally. Maybe she was actually getting serious about. My phone rang. It was Ashley. "Did you see it?" she squealed before I could even say hello. "I got an interview. But Britt, I need your help with something really important." "Here we go." "What?" "Well, I need to look professional for the interview, right? First impressions are everything. I need some nice clothes and a trip to the salon, you know, to really wow them. I was thinking maybe you could help me out? Like, $800 should cover everything." $800? I nearly choked. "Absolutely not. Please, Britt, this could be my big break." Her voice turned desperate. "I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I get the job." "You want me to get the job, don't you?" "Ashley. The receptionist is the first person who sees you, and they always report back to the hiring manager. I read about it online. I need to look perfect. Please, please, please." I rubbed my temples. "Ashley. Please, Britt, pretty please? I promise this is the last thing I'll ever ask for." 10 minutes of this. 10 solid minutes of begging, promising, and emotional manipulation. I knew what she was doing. I knew it, and yet. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth, pulling up my banking app. "But this is absolutely the last time." "You're the best sister ever," she squealed. "I love you so much." I transferred the money, hating myself a little as I did it. But maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that finally got her on track. A few days later, I called Ashley during my lunch break. "Hey, how did the interview go?" I asked as soon as she picked up. There was a pause on the other end. "What interview?" My stomach dropped. "The interview you needed the $800 for? The one you showed me the invitation for?" "Oh, that." She gave a little laugh that made my skin crawl. "Yeah, about that. I went to check out the company, and honestly, Britt, it just wasn't for me. The position was super boring. Just data entry and filing, totally monotonous stuff. I'd die of boredom in a job like that. I need something more creative, you know?" The rage that had been building over months finally boiled over. "You're not in a position to be picky," I shouted into the phone. You haven't worked a day in your life. And I'm not going to support you forever while you wait for your dream job to fall into your lap. Oh, she cut me off quickly. Sorry, Britt, I've got to go, waiting for a super important call. Talk later. The line went dead before I could say another word. I sat at my desk, shaking with anger, when something occurred to me. I pulled up Instagram and went to her profile. There, posted just hours ago, was my sister, not in any professional interview outfit, but in a sparkling party dress that probably cost every cent of the money I'd given her. The caption read, "Life is a party, dress like it." I tried calling her back immediately, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, no response. By the time I left work that evening, I'd worked myself into such a state that instead of heading home, I drove straight to her apartment. I could hear the bass thumping from halfway down the block. As I approached her building, the music got louder and louder. By the time I reached her floor, it was obvious she was having a full-blown party, on a Wednesday night, no less. I still had the spare key from when I'd helped her move in. My hand shook as I fitted it into the lock. The door opened silently, the music so loud it drowned out any sound I might have made. The scene that greeted me was like something out of a college movie. There had to be at least 20 people crammed into the small apartment. Drinks everywhere, music blaring, people dancing. And there, in the middle of it all, was my sister, wearing that expensive dress I'd paid for, dancing like she didn't have a care in the world. I was about to storm across the room and confront Ashley when suddenly the music cut off. In the momentary silence, I heard my sister's voice, loud and clear. "You guys want to know the best part?" Ashley was saying, her words slightly slurred. "My sister, my rich, successful sister Brittany, she pays for all of this." She gestured grandly around the apartment, nearly spilling her drink. My feet felt frozen to the floor as I listened. "She actually gave me $800 for interview clothes." Ashley made air quotes with her fingers. "Can you believe how stupid she is? I mean, look at this dress. Much better than some boring office suit, right?" More laughter. I recognized some of the faces in the crowd, people I'd met before, people who knew me. "And get this," Ashley continued, clearly enjoying her audience, "she actually thinks I'm going to get a job. Like, why would I need to work when I have a cash cow for a sister?" She took another sip of her drink. "All I have to do is cry a little about wanting to be independent, and she throws money at me." The group around her erupted in laughter and cheers. "You're so lucky," one girl called out. "My sister would never." "That's because your sister isn't a gullible idiot," Ashley replied with a smirk. "I swear, Brittany actually believes all that crap about me wanting to." Someone in the crowd finally noticed me standing there. The person's face went pale, and they grabbed their friend's arm, pointing in my direction. Like a wave, the realization spread through the room. The laughter died, replaced by uncomfortable coughs and whispers. Ashley, still grinning from her performance, followed their gazes. When she saw me, the smile vanished from her face so fast it was almost comical. The color drained from her cheeks, and her drink slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. I walked to the center of the room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor in the sudden silence. Every eye was on me as I stopped in the middle of what had become a makeshift dance floor. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "So this is what you really think of me," I said, looking directly at my sister. "This is how you treat someone who's tried to help you. You lie to me, manipulate me, steal from me, and then laugh about it with your friends. You think I'm a fool?" The silence in the room was deafening. Some people were already quietly gathering their things, trying to slip out unnoticed. Then Ashley's shock wore off, and a calculated look crossed her face, one I'd seen before, but never properly recognized. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked, her voice taking on that familiar whining tone, but this time with an edge of triumph. "You'll keep supporting me anyway." "You know why?" "Because if you don't, I'll just tell Mom and Dad. And you know whose side they'll take, they always do. They'll make your life hell until you help your poor little sister again." I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of the apartment, my head held high. As I reached the elevator, I heard the music start up again behind me, the bass thumping through the walls as if nothing had happened. The weeks that followed were quiet. My sister didn't call, and surprisingly, neither did my parents. The silence should have been peaceful, but instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. I knew it was only a matter of time before the other shoe dropped. 3 months of silence ended with a ping from my phone. A message from Ashley popped up on my screen, rent's due for the next quarter. Need money for food and clothes too. Send it ASAP. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything that had happened, she was still treating me like her personal ATM. I typed back a simple response, "No, I'm not paying anything else for you. Ever." My phone immediately started buzzing with incoming calls from Ashley. I watched it ring out again and again, feeling a strange sense of calm as I ignored each attempt. Then Mom's name flashed across my screen. "Brittany," she said as soon as I picked up, her voice stern. "We need to have a serious conversation. Come to the house tomorrow after work." The next evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway with a knot in my stomach. As soon as I walked through the door, I knew I'd walked into an ambush. Ashley was sitting on the couch, wearing no makeup, her hair pulled back messily, looking every bit the part of the suffering victim. Mom and Dad sat on either side of her like guards. I barely had time to close the door before Dad started in on me. "How could you do this to your sister?" he demanded. "She's about to be evicted because of you. Do you have any idea what you're putting her through?" Mom jumped in. "She's barely eating, she's so stressed." I looked at Ashley, who sniffled dramatically on cue. The Oscar-worthy performance made my blood boil. "Are you kidding me?" I shot back. "I paid her rent for 6 months. I gave her money for clothes, for food, and you know what she did with it? She threw parties. Bought party dresses. And then had the nerve to brag to her friends about what a fool I was for giving her money." "Oh, please," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "She was just joking around with her friends. You're being too sensitive." Joking? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. She literally called me a cash cow and bragged about manipulating me. "You're the older sister," Dad cut in, his voice hard. "It's your responsibility to help her. We raised you better than this." "My responsibility?" I repeated incredulously. My responsibility was to help her become independent, not bankroll her permanent vacation. Ashley sat there through it all, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I would cave, just like every other time. I looked at my family, my mother's disapproving frown, my father's stern glare, my sister's smug expression, and something inside me snapped. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done. I'm not giving her another cent. She's an adult. If she wants to live independently, she can pay her own bills like the rest of us." I was heading for the door. Behind me, I could hear Dad yelling about family responsibility, Mom crying about how she'd raised such a selfish daughter, and Ashley's theatrical sobs. I got in my car and drove home, my phone buzzing constantly with calls and messages. I turned it off without looking at any of them. For the first time in months, I felt truly free, free from the manipulation, free from the guilt, free from the endless demands. A few weeks after our showdown, my cousin Jackie called to check on me. She'd heard about the fight and wanted to give me some updates. "Your parents are paying Ashley's rent now," she told me. "They had to take money out of their retirement fund to cover it. She still hasn't even looked for a job." 2 months of relative peace followed. Then one evening, my phone lit up with Mom's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Brittany?" Her voice was trembling. We have a problem." The story came out in bits and pieces, punctuated by my mother's barely suppressed sobs. The apartment owner had finally had enough of the neighbors' complaints about Ashley's constant parties. He'd shown up unannounced during one of her latest bashes, with the police in tow. "But that's not the worst part," Mom's voice cracked. when they did an inventory of the apartment. Brittany, Ashley had sold some of the furniture and appliances. The owner's furniture. She'd been selling things bit by bit to pay for her parties. I sank into my couch, stunned. She what? She's being charged with theft, Mom was openly crying now. But the owner said if we reimburse him for everything she sold, he won't press charges. Please, Brittany, we need your help. Your father and I don't have enough after covering her rent. No, I said firmly. I warned all of you what would happen if you kept enabling her. This is the result of how you raised her, making excuses for everything she does, never letting her face consequences. How can you be so heartless? Mom's voice rose. She made some mistakes, but she's family. Think about what this would do to her future. Think about what it would do to this family. I am thinking about her future, I replied. Maybe facing real consequences is exactly what she needs. Please, Brittany, she tried one last time, her voice thick with tears. If you ever loved your sister. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up. A week later, Jackie called again. Thought you'd want to know, she said. Your parents cashed out what was left of their retirement fund to pay off the apartment owner. They had to pay for all the missing furniture, plus a huge penalty to break the lease early. Ashley's been kicked out, obviously. Where is she now? Back in your parents' house. Still not working, still posting on Instagram about living her truth or whatever. Jackie paused. Your parents are telling everyone you abandoned the family in their time of need. That was 6 months ago. Ashley still lives with our parents, still doesn't work, and still posts inspirational quotes about weathering life's storms. Mom and Dad had to postpone their retirement, but they haven't learned their lesson, they're still supporting her, still making excuses. As for me? I haven't spoken to any of them since that last phone call. Sometimes I see posts from extended family members about holiday gatherings I'm not invited to anymore. I hear through Jackie about the stories they tell, painting me as the villainous older sister who abandoned her family. But here's the thing, sometimes being the bad guy means you're the only one brave enough to stop the madness. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. And sometimes family isn't about enabling bad behavior, it's about having the courage to say no when everyone else is saying yes. My name is Lila, and I just graduated from high school. I live, or should I say lived, with my parents, Sarah and David Mitchell, in a modest 2-story house in Pennsylvania. There's also my older brother Jake, though he moved out a few years ago to a nearby city. He's 25 now, 7 years older than me, and has always been the golden child of our family. Growing up, I watched how my parents bent over backwards to give Jake everything he wanted. If he showed even the slightest interest in something, they'd jump at the chance to support him. Hockey? They bought him the most expensive gear. Drawing? The finest art supplies. Skateboarding? A custom-made board. It didn't matter that he'd get bored after a few months and move on to the next thing, they were always ready to fund his next adventure. I remember this one Christmas that really stuck with me. Jake's birthday is a week before Christmas, and that year, when he turned 16, my parents bought him this super expensive gaming computer he'd been talking about nonstop. Must have cost them a fortune. Come Christmas morning, all I got was a card saying Merry Christmas. They said they'd run out of money. That's pretty much how it always went. Jake's birthdays were these huge celebrations with awesome presents, and I'd get whatever was left over at Christmas, if anything at all. My parents never really bothered with my birthdays. A small cake, maybe a new shirt or some school supplies, that was about it. No parties, no celebrations, nothing special. That's why I was completely thrown off when they sat me down in our living room last week, just days after my graduation. Lila, Mom said, smoothing her shirt like she always does when she's trying to appear casual, we've been thinking. You're turning 18 soon, and it's a big milestone. We want to throw you a proper party. I nearly choked on my coffee. A party? I asked, sure I must have heard wrong. Dad nodded, looking unusually enthusiastic. Yes, sweetheart. We'll invite the whole family, make it a real celebration. I sat there, staring at them both, trying to figure out what the catch was. My parents aren't the type to suddenly change their ways without a reason. Something was up, I could feel it in my gut. Why now? I asked, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. You've never wanted to throw me a party before. Well, you're graduating high school, going to college soon, Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. It's different now. You're becoming an adult. I nodded slowly, but something didn't feel right. The way they were acting, the sudden interest in celebrating my birthday, it was all too convenient. But I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was wrong. Over the next few days, I actually started getting excited about the party. Maybe I'd been too quick to judge my parents' intentions. After all, it made sense. I was turning 18, had just graduated with honors, and was heading off to college soon. Perhaps they'd finally realized that I deserved some recognition too. I kept catching Mom on the phone, talking in hushed tones about party arrangements. She was ordering a fancy cake from the local bakery, planning out decorations, and putting together a guest list. Dad seemed unusually invested too, cleaning up the backyard and fixing that wobbly patio furniture he'd been ignoring for months. Do you need any help? I offered one afternoon, finding Mom in the kitchen surrounded by party planning notes. She jumped slightly, quickly shuffling some papers together. No, sweetie. We want this to be a surprise. Just focus on enjoying your special day. I shrugged and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. Okay, if you're sure. By the way, is Jake coming? Of course he is, Mom replied, but something in her voice sounded off. He wouldn't miss his little sister's big day. I wanted to believe her, but Jake hadn't returned any of my texts in the past week. Typical Jake, really, always too busy with his own life to care about anyone else's. 2 days before the party, I was heading downstairs to get a glass of water when I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. I normally wouldn't eavesdrop, but something in Dad's tone made me pause at the top of the stairs. David, are you sure everything will be perfect? Mom's voice was tense. Your mother is very particular about these things. I froze. Grandma Eleanor was coming? She lived in Massachusetts and rarely visited us. The last time I'd seen her was almost 2 years ago. Sarah, we have to make this work, Dad replied urgently. Mom needs to see that we're making an effort with Lila. You know how she gets about how we treat the kids. I know. She's always going on about how we favor Jake. And we can't afford to upset her right now. That money she gave us last year is the only thing keeping us afloat. If she decides to stop helping us. Their voices dropped lower, but I'd heard enough. Everything suddenly made sense, the sudden interest in my birthday, the elaborate party plans, all of it. This wasn't about me at all. This was about impressing Grandma Eleanor. I slid down to sit on the top step, my throat tight with disappointment. Grandma Eleanor had always been different from my parents. She saw through Jake's charm and actually paid attention to me. Every time she visited, she'd point out how unfairly my parents treated me compared to Jake. And I knew she was wealthy. She lived in this beautiful historic house in Massachusetts and had helped my parents financially several times over the years. The pieces all fell into place. My parents weren't throwing this party to celebrate my achievements or to make up for years of neglect. They were doing it to put on a show for Grandma Eleanor, to convince her they were good parents who treated both their children equally. They were trying to secure their financial lifeline. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to the sound of voices and my mother's overly cheerful tone floating up from outside. I peered through my bedroom window and my heart leaped. There was Grandma Eleanor, climbing out of her practical Toyota Camry. I threw on some clothes and rushed downstairs, nearly colliding with Dad in the hallway. The moment she saw me, Grandma Eleanor's face lit up with genuine warmth, something I hadn't seen much of in our house lately. She opened her arms wide, and I practically ran into them. There's my beautiful girl. She hugged me tight, smelling of fresh-baked cookies and that mild lavender soap she always used. When she pulled back, her eyes were sparkling. Let me look at you properly. A high school graduate already. What's next for you, sweetheart? We moved into the living room, where Mom had already arranged the furniture to look like something out of a home decor magazine. I sat next to Grandma on the sofa while my parents perched nervously on the edge of their seats. Well, I started, trying to ignore my mother's intense stare. I actually got accepted to several colleges. 2 of them offered me spots. That's wonderful. Grandma squeezed my hand. Tell me about them. The state university offered me a full scholarship, I explained, watching my parents nod approvingly. And then there's Brington College. I hesitated, knowing my parents thought this option was off the table. It's a really prestigious private school, but the tuition is about $25,000 a year. Grandma Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, a small smile playing at her lips. She didn't say anything, but something in her expression made me wonder if she was already forming plans of her own. The doorbell started ringing as guests arrived, first Aunt Marie and Uncle Bob, then my cousins, followed by some family friends. Mom rushed around, playing the perfect hostess, while Dad manned the grill in the backyard. But there was one person notably absent, Jake. I tried calling him 3 times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. I asked my mom about him, and she replied he was busy with his auto parts company, but would definitely find time to congratulate me later. The party was in full swing by mid-afternoon. The backyard was filled with the chatter of relatives, family friends, and the smell of grilled food. I tried to enjoy myself, but I couldn't shake the weird vibe coming from my parents. They kept hovering around Grandma Eleanor like anxious satellites, making sure her glass was always full and her plate never empty. I was just finishing a piece of birthday cake when Grandma Eleanor suddenly stood up, tapping her fork against her glass. The chatter died down as everyone turned to look at her. I'd like to say something, she announced, her voice carrying across the yard. Today, we're celebrating not just Lila's 18th birthday, but also her acceptance into college. She smiled warmly at me. Lila, honey, I've watched you grow up into an incredible young woman. Unlike some people, she paused meaningfully, you've always worked hard and never taken anything for granted. My parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I could see Mom's fingers nervously shredding a paper napkin. When you told me about your acceptance to Brington College, Grandma continued, I could see how much you wanted to go there, even though you thought it was out of reach. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. That's why I've decided to give you a special gift. She walked over and handed me the envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a check. When I saw the amount, I thought I was seeing things wrong. I blinked and looked again. $100,000, Grandma announced to the stunned crowd. Enough to cover your tuition at Brington College. The silence lasted for about 3 seconds, before erupting into chaos. Aunt Marie let out a gasp that could have sucked in half the oxygen in the yard. Uncle Bob started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. My cousins were whooping and cheering. I just sat there, staring at the check through tears that wouldn't stop falling. This wasn't just money, it was freedom, opportunity, a chance to go to my dream school without drowning in debt. Grandma, I choked out, standing up to hug her. I can't believe, thank you so much. From the corner of my eye, I could see my parents. They weren't clapping. Mom's face had gone pale, and Dad looked like he'd been hit with a brick. They were whispering to each other, their heads close together, occasionally shooting glances at the check in my hands. I spent most of the evening talking with Grandma Eleanor. She told me stories about her college days and gave me advice about living on campus. It felt like the first time someone in my family was actually excited about my future. The guests gradually filtered out as evening fell, leaving behind empty plates and half-full cups. Grandma Eleanor decided to spend the night, saying she was too tired to drive home. I helped her set up in our guest room, grateful for a few more hours with her. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, Grandma hugged me tight and headed home, promising to call soon to help me plan for college. I watched her car disappear down the street, still hardly believing what had happened. It wasn't until that evening that Jake finally showed up. He walked in without knocking, looking like he'd been sucking on lemons. His expensive designer clothes were wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Happy birthday, sis," he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. No hug, no card, not even a token gift. He headed straight for the kitchen where our parents were, leaving me standing in the hallway. That evening, the atmosphere at the dinner table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jake sat across from me, slouched in his chair and playing with his phone. Dad cleared his throat several times before finally speaking. "Lila, honey, we need to have a serious family discussion," he began, setting down his fork. "Your brother's been going through a difficult time. His auto parts business, well, things haven't been going as planned." Jake suddenly looked up from his phone, his face drawn. "The banks are breathing down my neck," he muttered. "I took out some loans to expand the business, but the market crashed, and now they want their money back." I couldn't help but scoff. "Really? Because your Instagram shows you vacationing in Hawaii just last month. With different girls in every photo, by the way." "Stay out of my social media," Jake snapped, his face reddening. "That's none of your business." "Calm down, both of you," Dad interrupted. "Lila, this is serious. Your brother could lose everything." I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. "What does any of this have to do with me?" Mom and Dad exchanged one of their loaded looks, the kind that made it clear they'd rehearsed this conversation. "Well, sweetheart," Mom said, her voice honey-sweet, "family always helps family. That's what we've always taught you, right?" My blood ran cold as I started to understand where this was going. "We think," Dad continued, "that the money Grandma gave you could really help Jake out of this situation." I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to give Jake my college money?" "It makes perfect sense," Jake chimed in, suddenly animated. "My business is established. It's more important than some college degree you might not even use." "That money is for my education," I protested, my voice rising. "Grandma gave it to me specifically for Brington." "You got a full ride to state," Mom countered. "You can still go to college. But Jake needs this money now." "No." The word came out firm and clear. "That money is mine. Grandma gave it to me." The change in their faces was instant. Dad exploded out of his chair, his hand clamping around my wrist like a vice. He yanked me away from the table, ignoring my cry of pain. "You'll go to your room right now," he snarled, dragging me toward the stairs. "And you'll stay there until you come to your senses. Don't even think about calling your grandmother. If you breathe a word of this to her, you're out of this house forever. Do you understand me? We'll disown you." I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the house settling. My wrist still ached where Dad had grabbed me. Around midnight, I heard my parents and Jake talking in low, angry voices downstairs, but I couldn't make out the words. Eventually, the house fell silent. By 5 in the morning, I'd made up my mind. I pulled my backpack from under the bed and started packing. Documents first: birth certificate, social security card, high school diploma. My laptop went in next, then some clothes and toiletries. I checked my wallet. I had about $300 saved up from my part-time job at the library. The check from Grandma was safely tucked into a book I kept on my nightstand. I added it to my documents, double-checking that everything important was secure. Moving like a ghost, I crept down the stairs, avoiding the third step that always creaked. The house was dark and quiet except for Dad's snoring from the master bedroom. I grabbed my phone charger from the living room and some granola bars from the kitchen. The morning air was cool as I slipped out the back door. I didn't look back. At the train station, my phone started buzzing. Mom's face flashed on the screen. I declined the call. Then one from Jake, declined. Dad, declined. Messages started flooding in. "Where are you? Come home right now." You're being ridiculous. Think about your brother. If you don't come back immediately, you'll regret it. I turned off notifications and bought a ticket to Massachusetts. The train wouldn't leave for another hour, so I sat in the station's cafe, my backpack clutched tight against my chest, jumping at every sound. It was late afternoon when I finally reached Grandma Eleanor's house. She opened the door and her eyes went wide with surprise. "Lila, what on earth?" She ushered me inside. "Your father called me this morning. He said you'd run off with some boy, that you were planning to waste the college money on parties and—" "That's a lie." The words burst out of me. They wanted me to give the money to Jake. His business is failing, and they tried to force me to give him my college fund. When I refused, Dad, I touched my wrist where the bruises were forming. They locked me in my room and threatened to disown me if I told you. Grandma's face went from concerned to thunderous. Without a word, she pulled out her phone and dialed Dad's number, putting it on speaker. "David? Yes, Lila's here." "Oh, thank God," Dad's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mom, she's been acting out, making up stories." "Save it," Grandma cut him off. "She told me everything. About Jake's failing business, about you trying to steal her college fund, about you threatening her." "Mom, she's lying. She's just being dramatic." I said save it. Grandma's voice could have frozen fire. "I've watched for years as you favored Jake, as you spoiled him rotten while neglecting Lila. I've helped you financially time and time again, hoping you'd change. Well, I'm done. From this moment, you can consider my financial support ended. And I'll be calling my lawyer tomorrow to update my will. You and Jake won't be seeing a penny." She hung up, then turned to me, her face softening. "You'll stay here with me until college starts," she said firmly. "And don't worry about a thing." Living with Grandma Eleanor was like stepping into a different world. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of coffee and whatever she was baking. Her specialty was apple pie, but she made amazing blueberry muffins too. I helped around the house, doing the cleaning and laundry. It wasn't because she asked me to, I wanted to contribute somehow. We fell into an easy rhythm together, sharing meals, watching old movies, and talking about everything and nothing. My phone kept buzzing with messages and calls. Mom, Dad, and Jake tried every platform they could think of: phone calls, texts, Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Their messages ranged from guilt-tripping to angry to manipulative. I ignored them all. The summer passed quietly. Finally, August arrived, and it was time for me to start at Brington. Grandma helped me move into my dorm room, making my bed with fresh sheets and arranging my things just so. My roommate, Sarah, seemed nice, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly excited about my future. The first month of college was a whirlwind of new experiences. Classes were challenging but fascinating. I was making friends, and I'd even joined the campus newspaper. For once, I wasn't living in Jake's shadow, I was just Lila, finding my own path. Then one Tuesday, my resident advisor knocked on my door. "Lila, your parents are here. They're waiting at the campus coffee shop." My stomach dropped, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. I found them sitting at a corner table, both looking somewhat deflated compared to the last time I'd seen them. "Lila," Mom reached for my hand, but I kept them firmly in my lap. "You look good. What do you want?" I asked, getting straight to the point. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We wanted to apologize. We were wrong to try to take your college money. We were wrong to threaten you. We were wrong about a lot of things." I waited, knowing there was more. There always was with them. "We were hoping," Dad continued, his voice carefully measured, "that maybe you could talk to your grandmother about her will. We're not asking for your money anymore, but—" "No," I said simply. "If you want to fix things with Grandma, you'll have to talk to her yourselves. I'm not getting involved." They exchanged frustrated looks. "Lila, be reasonable," Dad started. "I am being reasonable. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. If you want to repair your relationship with Grandma, that's between you and her. Mom's face hardened. So that's it? You won't help your family at all? I stood up, gathering my things. You know what's funny? When you wanted my college money, it was family helps family. But you never helped me. Ever. It only goes one way with you, doesn't it? 2 months into my first semester at Brington, I got a call from Aunt Marie. I almost didn't answer. She'd always been closer to Mom's side of things, but something made me pick up. Lila, are you sitting down? Her voice was hushed, like she was sharing state secrets. I thought you should know what's happening back home. Jake's business, it's completely gone under. He owes the banks hundreds of thousands. He's moved back in with your parents. I let that sink in. The mighty Jake, who'd always looked down on my modest college plans, was back in his childhood bedroom. Your parents, Aunt Marie continued, they're spending their retirement savings to help him with the debts. They're talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house. Later that same week, Grandma called. I had some visitors today, she said, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. Your parents showed up on my doorstep. They were begging me to help with Jake's debts. Said they were going to lose everything. She paused. I told them no. Said they needed to handle this situation themselves for once. How did they take it? About as well as you'd expect. Your mother cried, your father got angry. But I stood firm. I told them this was the consequence of years of spoiling Jake rotten while ignoring you. As the semester progressed, more news trickled in through various relatives. Dad had taken a second job. Mom was selling her jewelry. Jake had the audacity to buy a new iPhone while living rent-free on their dime. During fall break, I went to stay with Grandma. We baked pies together, and she helped me with my term paper research. She'd set up a proper guest room for me, with a desk and everything I needed for studying. Your midterm grades came, she mentioned one evening. Straight as. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Grandma. I hesitated before asking, do you ever regret cutting them off? She set down her knitting and looked at me seriously. Not for a second. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is let them face the consequences of their actions. She was right, of course. Every time I heard about my family's financial struggles, a small part of me felt guilty. But then I'd remember all the years of favoritism, all the Christmases with just a card while Jake got expensive gifts, all the times they dismissed my achievements while celebrating Jake's smallest accomplishments. Now I was thriving at Brington, making friends, earning top grades, and planning for a future I'd chosen. Meanwhile, they were dealing with the consequences of their choices. It wasn't my job to fix their mistakes, it never had been. The last I heard, Jake was talking about some new business idea he had, and my parents were still somehow trying to find ways to fund it. Some patterns are hard to break, I guess. But I had broken free of those patterns, thanks to Grandma's gift and her belief in me. My name is Lucy, and I'm 30 years old. I work as an investment analyst, and I'm pretty good at what I do. Some might say I'm too careful with money, but that's just who I am. Growing up as the younger of 2 sisters taught me early on that if I wanted something, I'd have to work for it myself. My sister, Sarah, is 3 years older than me. She's always been the golden child in our family, the pretty one, the social butterfly, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister, but our parents' favoritism was pretty obvious from day one. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the expectations. They always expected Sarah to succeed effortlessly, while I was just there. Sarah married Tom right after college. He works in construction management, and they quickly started having kids. Now they have 3, Emma, 7, Lucas, 5, and little Joey, 2. They're sweet kids, but Sarah always complains about how hard it is to manage them in their rented apartment. As for me, I've been lucky in my own way. My best friend Jenny's parents own several properties, and they'd been renting me a nice one-bedroom apartment at half the market rate for the past 5 years. They trust me, and I've never given them a reason not to. I've been saving money religiously since I started working. Living below my means, cooking at home instead of eating out, taking public transport when possible, all those small things add up. My colleagues often tease me about being too frugal. But I had a plan. I've always dreamed of having my own place, specifically a small country house. Working remotely became more common at our firm after the pandemic, and I only need to come to the office for important meetings. A peaceful place away from the city seemed perfect. Last week, I finally opened my savings account and really looked at the numbers. After years of careful planning and saving, I had enough for a down payment on a modest country house. I spent hours browsing real estate websites, looking at potential properties. Nothing too fancy, just a cozy place I could call my own. I was in the middle of browsing real estate listings when my phone rang. It was my mother, calling with her usual perfect timing. "Lucy, honey, don't forget we're expecting you for dinner on Saturday," she said, her voice carrying that subtle tone of command disguised as a reminder. "Sarah and Tom are coming with the kids. And please try to be on time for once." I arrived at my parents' suburban house at exactly 5:05 p.m. that Saturday. The driveway was already full. Sarah's minivan took up most of the space, forcing me to park on the street. Before I even reached the front door, I could hear the chaos inside. Emma and Lucas were probably chasing each other around the house, while little Joey added to the cacophony with his toddler squeals. "Lucy's here," Sarah announced as I walked in, barely looking up from where she was trying to convince Joey to eat his mashed potatoes. The kids barely acknowledged my presence, too caught up in their own world. Mom was in her element, fussing over everyone and everything. Dad was already settled in his favorite chair, newspaper in hand. "Everything's getting so expensive these days," he grumbled from behind the pages. "Have you seen the price of gas? Highway robbery, that's what it is." "Tell me about it," Tom chimed in, helping himself to another serving of Mom's lasagna. "And my boss, what a piece of work. Yesterday he comes in, right? Completely changes the project timeline without even consulting the team." "Who does that?" Sarah nodded sympathetically at her husband while wrestling with Joey's bib. "At least you get to leave the house. Try being stuck in a cramped apartment all day with these three." I took advantage of the chaos to check my phone under the table. There was this perfect little cottage I'd been eyeing, 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a gorgeous garden. The price was right in my range too. I was so absorbed in the photos that I didn't notice Mom watching me until she spoke up. "Lucy, what's so interesting on that phone? You've barely touched your food." All eyes turned to me, and I felt my cheeks warm slightly. I could have made up something about work, but for some reason, I decided to be honest. "Actually," I said, "I'm looking at houses. I'm thinking about buying one soon." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the kids seemed to sense something had changed. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, and Tom's endless complaints about his boss died mid-sentence. "Buying a house?" Mom repeated, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "You?" "Well, yes," I said, already regretting my candor. "I'm just looking at options right now, nothing definite." "What kind of house?" Sarah asked, her voice oddly sharp. "Where?" "I haven't really decided yet," I said vaguely, trying to redirect the conversation. "Hey, Mom, this lasagna is amazing. Did you change your recipe?" But I could feel it, the wheels turning in their heads, the unspoken thoughts almost visible in the air. My parents exchanged one of their meaningful looks, and Sarah kept shooting glances at Tom. The usual dinner chaos resumed eventually, but something had shifted. The rest of the evening felt off-kilter, like everyone was playing their usual roles, but with their minds elsewhere. A week flew by, and I'd almost forgotten about the strange tension at the family dinner. Work kept me busy, and I spent my evenings researching mortgage rates and property taxes. I was in the middle of a Zoom meeting when my phone started buzzing with my mother's caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, but she called right back. 3 times. Finally, during my lunch break, I called her back, expecting some kind of emergency given her persistence. "Lucy, finally," Mom's voice was bursting with excitement. "I found the perfect house for you. You won't believe how perfect it is. Martha, you remember Martha from church? She told me about this listing in her neighborhood. It's absolutely ideal." I put down my lunch and pressed my fingers to my temple, already feeling a headache coming on. "Mom, I haven't even asked for help finding a house." But she was already in full swing, impossible to interrupt. "It has 4 bedrooms, no, 5. The master bedroom is huge, and there are these adorable children's rooms with built-in closets. Oh, and the backyard. There's already a playground installed, can you believe it? And the location is just perfect, walking distance to St. Mary's Elementary School and the public library." "Mom," I finally managed to cut in. "I appreciate you thinking of me, but that's not what I'm looking for at all." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice gentle but firm. "I'm looking for something completely different. I want a small country house, something cozy just for me. I don't need multiple children's rooms or a playground." "Don't be ridiculous," she said sharply. "You can't just think about yourself. You need to plan ahead. This house is perfect, it's even on sale. Martha says the owners are motivated to sell quickly." "I know what works for me," I said firmly. "I want a quiet place in the countryside where I can work from home. That's what I'm looking for." She made a sound of displeasure in her throat. "Well, don't come crying to me when you realize I was right." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, feeling a mixture of frustration and guilt. But I didn't have long to dwell on it because my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Hey sis, check this out." What followed was a barrage of links to real estate listings. Every single one was a massive family home in the city. 4 to 6 bedrooms, multiple bathrooms, huge yards, all near schools and parks. I quickly typed back, "Thanks, but I'm actually looking for something smaller in the countryside." Sarah's response was immediate, "But these are such good deals. Look at this one, it even has an in-law suite." More links kept coming. During afternoon meetings, my phone kept buzzing with messages from Sarah. Each one was another house listing, each bigger and more family-oriented than the last. I stopped checking Sarah's messages after the 20th house listing. Instead, I called Amanda Chen, a realtor I'd found through positive online reviews. She had a reputation for really listening to her clients, which was exactly what I needed. "I want something small and cozy," I explained. "A country house, but not too far from the city. Good internet connection is a must since I work from home most days. Maybe a small garden where I could grow some herbs and vegetables." "Budget?" I told her my range, and her eyes lit up. "I think I might have exactly what you're looking for. It just came on the market yesterday. Want to take a look this weekend?" The house was about 40 minutes from the city, set back from a quiet country road. As soon as Amanda's car turned into the gravel driveway, I felt something click inside me. The house was perfect, a charming 2-bedroom cottage with white siding and dark green shutters. A wraparound porch hosted 2 rocking chairs, and mature maple trees provided shade in the front yard. Inside, sunlight streamed through large windows into an open-plan living area. The kitchen was small but updated, with butcher block countertops and new appliances. A wood-burning fireplace dominated one wall of the living room. Upstairs, there were 2 modestly sized bedrooms and a full bathroom with a clawfoot tub. But it was the sunroom at the back of the house that sealed the deal. Windows on 3 sides looked out over a well-tended garden with raised beds and a small greenhouse. "The owner is motivated to sell quickly," Amanda mentioned as we stood in the sunroom. "She's willing to offer a 5% discount for a fast closing." I didn't hesitate. "I want it." The next week was a whirlwind of paperwork, mortgage applications, and negotiations. I put down a larger down payment than required to keep the monthly payments comfortable. Every night, I fell asleep looking at photos of my future home, imagining where I'd put my furniture, planning what I'd plant in the garden. When everything was signed and official, I felt like I was walking on air. I couldn't wait to share my news with my family, despite their previous attempts to influence my decision. The following Saturday, I drove to my parents' house for dinner, practically buzzing with excitement. Sarah and Tom were already there with the kids, as usual. We settled in for dinner, and Mom served her traditional pot roast. The usual complaints and conversations flowed around the table: Tom's latest workplace drama, Sarah's struggles with the kids' school schedules, Dad's commentary on the economy. Then Mom turned to me with a smile that made my stomach clench. "Oh, Lucy, I'm so glad you're here. I was just talking to Barbara next door. She's selling her house. You remember Barbara's house? She's willing to give us, you, a good price. You should really consider." Actually, I interrupted, unable to contain myself any longer. I've already bought a house. The clatter of cutlery against plates came to an abrupt halt. Emma's cartwheel in the background stopped mid-turn. The silence was absolute. I took a deep breath and started describing my new home, my voice filled with enthusiasm despite the tension around the table. "It's this beautiful cottage about 40 minutes outside the city. 2 bedrooms, the most amazing sunroom, and there's even a small greenhouse in the backyard. The previous owner had these gorgeous raised garden beds, and..." "Are you out of your mind?" Dad's fist came down on the table, making the plates jump. I'd never seen him this angry before. Joey started crying at the sudden noise. What?" I stammered, completely thrown by their reaction. "How dare you?" Mom's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you buy a house without consulting us first? After everything we showed you? All those perfect family homes we found?" I felt like I'd suddenly stepped into some bizarre alternate reality. "Why would I need to consult you about buying my own house with my own money?" "Because we had it all planned out." Mom was practically screaming now. "Barbara's house would have been perfect. Right here in the neighborhood, plenty of room for everyone." "Room for everyone?" I repeated slowly, feeling increasingly confused. "It's just going to be me living there." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom and Dad exchanged looks, while Sarah sat there with an eerily calm expression on her face. Tom was suddenly very interested in his plate. "Actually, Lucy," Mom said, in a tone that made my blood run cold, "the plan was for Sarah, Tom, and the kids to live there with you." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to choke out. Sarah nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "We're so cramped in that apartment, Lucy. It's really hard on the kids. Your house would have given us all the space we need." She smiled, like she was discussing borrowing a sweater. "And since we wouldn't have to pay rent or utilities, we could finally start saving some money." I looked around the table, from face to face, waiting for someone to crack a smile, to say "gotcha," or burst out laughing. But all I saw were dead serious expressions. Dad's stern disapproval. Mom's righteous anger. Sarah's entitled expectation. Tom's awkward avoidance. I struggled to form words. "You all just assumed I would buy a house for Sarah's family to live in?" "Well, of course." Mom threw up her hands. "That's what family does. We help each other." "Help each other?" I repeated incredulously. "This isn't helping, this is expecting me to provide housing for 5 people without even asking me." "You're being selfish," Sarah said, her calm facade cracking slightly. "You know how hard it is for us in that tiny apartment. Emma and Lucas have to share a room, and Joey's crib is in our bedroom. It's not fair to the children." I felt like I was drowning in crazy. The room seemed to spin a little as the full impact of their expectations hit me. They had all sat there, for weeks, planning out my future, deciding how I should spend my money, without ever once considering what I wanted or even thinking they should ask me about it. You need to cancel this ridiculous purchase immediately, Mom demanded, her voice sharp with authority. Call your realtor first thing Monday morning. Barbara's house is still available, and it's perfect, right here in the neighborhood, close to all the good schools and kindergartens. No. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. The word came out stronger than I expected, fueled by decades of pent-up frustration. The dining room erupted into chaos. Mom jumped up from her chair, waving her arms. Dad's voice boomed over everyone else's. The kids started crying, picking up on the tension in the room. But we'll be so cramped, Sarah wailed, as if she hadn't heard me at all. Do you know how hard it'll be to get the kids to school from all the way out there? Emma has ballet on Tuesdays, Lucas has soccer on Thursdays. I spun to face my sister, something inside me finally snapping. You're not going to be cramped anywhere, because you're not living in my house. None of you are, ever. Is that clear enough for you? The room fell silent. They all stared at me like I'd grown a second head. The entitled shock on their faces was almost comical. Lucy, Mom gasped, clutching her pearls. How can you be so cruel to your own sister? I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, their voices rising again behind me. I couldn't listen to another word. I got in my car and drove home in a daze, their screams still ringing in my ears. Sitting alone in my apartment later that night, memories started flooding back. Christmas, 1999, Sarah got the expensive American Girl doll she wanted, while I received the knockoff version from the discount store. They look exactly the same, Mom had said, but they didn't. Our 16th birthday, Sarah had gotten a brand new Volkswagen Beetle when she turned 16, complete with a big red bow on top. I got Dad's old Honda with 150,000 miles on it and a tendency to break down. High school graduation. Sarah's graduation party was a catered affair in the backyard with a hired DJ and custom decorations. Mine was a quiet family dinner because we had too many expenses that month. College years. Sarah attended her dream school with our parents covering every expense, tuition, room and board, even a generous monthly allowance. Meanwhile, I spent my senior year of high school applying for every scholarship I could find, staying up late to maintain my perfect GPA, knowing it was my only shot at higher education. And now, here we were. After years of favoring Sarah, of giving her everything while I worked for scraps, they'd just assumed they could commandeer my house, the one thing I'd achieved completely on my own. They'd planned to hand over my dream home to Sarah, just like they'd handed her everything else. I was in the middle of packing my kitchen when the aggressive pounding started on my apartment door. The coffee mug I was wrapping in newspaper slipped from my hands, but thankfully landed on a pile of packing paper. Lucy, open this door right now, my father's voice boomed through the wood. We know you're in there. I froze, bubble wrap still in hand. More pounding followed. Go away, I shouted back. I'm not discussing this anymore. Don't you dare talk to us like that. Dad's fist made the door rattle in its frame. We raised you better than this. My hands were trembling as I picked up my phone. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. I mean it. I pulled up the keypad on my phone and deliberately pressed 9, making sure they could hear the beep. I'm dialing right now. You ungrateful little. Dad's curse was cut off by Mom's sharp intake of breath. We'll leave. Mom's voice had turned cold as ice, but this isn't over, Lucy. You're making a terrible mistake. I listened to their footsteps retreating down the hallway, then slid down against the wall, my heart pounding. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. So wrong. The first message from Sarah came an hour later, a photo of Emma and Lucas cramped together on their shared bunk bed. Look how little space they have, the caption read. Emma can't even have a desk for homework. I didn't respond. Another photo followed, Joey's crib wedged into the corner of Sarah and Tom's bedroom. He wakes up every time we come to bed. This isn't fair to him. Delete. When I continued to ignore her, Sarah's messages turned nasty. They started coming at all hours, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. You always were Dad's least favorite. Mom cries herself to sleep because of you. I hope you're happy all alone in that big house while your nieces and nephew suffer. I blocked her number, then her Facebook, then her Instagram. But she kept finding new ways to reach me, creating new accounts, using Tom's phone, even setting up fake email addresses. Then the phone calls started coming from other directions. First, it was Aunt Marie. Lucy, honey, I just heard what's happening with your sister. Surely you can find it in your heart to help family? Next came Uncle Bob. Kid, you need to think about what really matters here. Family comes first. My mother's best friend Susan, your mother is devastated. How could you do this to your own family? Even my old high school teacher, Mrs. Peterson, whom my mother still saw at church, Lucy, I always thought you were such a kind student. I'm so disappointed to hear about this situation with your sister. They all had the same message: I was selfish, heartless, cruel. I should give up my house, my dreams, my independence, to solve my sister's problems. None of them seemed to question why Sarah's housing situation was somehow my responsibility. After 2 weeks of constant harassment, I'd had enough. I went to my mobile carrier and changed my number, giving it only to my workplace and a handful of trusted friends who hadn't taken sides in this mess. Moving day was wonderfully quiet. I hired a moving company I'd never used before, making sure there was no way for my family to track the address through familiar local services. The movers were efficient and professional, and by sunset, I was standing in my new living room, surrounded by boxes and possibility. That first night in my cottage, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, listening to the crickets and watching the stars come out. No traffic noise, no sirens, no family drama, just peace. I felt something inside me finally relax, a tension I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for years. Of course, I still occasionally saw their social media posts. Sarah's passive-aggressive status updates about family betrayal and selfish siblings. Mom's thinly veiled posts about ungrateful children and family duty. The comments from relatives and family friends, all taking their side without knowing the full story. But here's the thing, none of it bothered me anymore. Their words couldn't touch me in my new sanctuary. I transformed the second bedroom into a home office, setting up my monitors to face the window where I could watch birds visit the bird feeder I installed. The previous owner's raised garden beds now burst with herbs and vegetables, my first attempt at gardening turning out surprisingly successful. The greenhouse became my weekend project, slowly filling with plants that made the space feel alive and vibrant. My work productivity actually improved without the constant family interruptions. My boss noticed and gave me more responsibility, along with a raise. I started taking online courses in investment strategy, expanding my expertise without anyone telling me I was wasting my time or should be focusing on finding a husband instead. Sure, there were moments when I missed the idea of family, not the reality of my family, but the dream of what a supportive family could be. Those moments usually passed quickly when I remembered the peace I'd gained in exchange. I made new friends in the area, other professionals who worked remotely, a local gardening group that met monthly, neighbors who respected boundaries and didn't feel entitled to my space or time. None of them knew my family history, and I preferred it that way. They knew me as I am, not as the person my family tried to force me to be. The funny thing is, I'm probably being more true to my parents' original dreams for their daughters than Sarah is. They raised us to be independent, successful women, they just never expected me to be the one who actually did it. And they certainly never expected me to be independent from them too. Sometimes the best family you can have is yourself, at least until you choose to add to it on your own terms, in your own time, in your own way. And that's more than enough for me.